So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Brad Bussie. I'm our VP of Cyber Risk Services here at Advyz 360. And today we're going to be talking about ransomware. And you really can't look anywhere right now without someone talking about ransomware. So we had this idea of, let's go a little bit deeper into the problem and let's talk about, is it something that's inevitable? Are we all going to experience this kind of an attack? Or is it something that is preventable? So we're going to spend some time talking a little bit more about, what is ransomware? And it'll give you a good idea at the end of it, really where we're all standing as far as that's concerned. So for those of you that haven't sat through one of our webinars before, I don't like to spend too much time on myself, but just to talk a little bit about where I've come from. So my early career was spent working for the Department of Defense. So I was at U.S. Northern Command as well as NORAD. Worked for a couple of three-letter agencies over the course of the years. I've built products. So I built a data security solution for a number of years. So I was a VP of product management, and then had my own consulting practice for a number of years, and had a great opportunity to come over here to Advyz 360, and am now one of the founding members of our Advyz practice, really, which is our cyber division over here. And I see some of you on the call, we've done some business together. Some of you are new to the practice, but just wanted to say welcome, and you'll learn a little bit more about what makes us special and a little bit different from some of the other VARs and system integrators out there. And it really does come down to our consulting practice. So today, just a couple of things that we're going to be going through. So we're going to talk about the state of ransomware. We're going to look at really what business leaders need to know and how we here at E360 and Advyz can actually help solve some of these problems related to ransomware. So this is kind of a new feature for me, but we're gonna try it today. We're gonna do a poll. So what you should see happen in just a second is a poll question pop up, and we're gonna spend just about 30 seconds. And I'd love it if everybody could just take a quick yes, no, or not sure. So has your organization or an organization that you know been victim to a ransomware attack? And what we're really looking for is one that was perhaps not detected and halted. So we've got some good results coming in. Give everybody just another couple of seconds. Okay, I think that's good. So let's end the poll and let's take a quick look at the results. So looks like about 56% of you said yes, 33% of you said no, and a couple of you said not sure. And that's pretty typical, I would say, based on the number of attacks that are happening every year and just a lot of the statistics that are out there. And I think that really brings up kind of our next point, which is, what is that state of ransomware today? And if you look at some of these stats, it's pretty interesting. So I'm a big numbers guy. I'm not particularly good at math, but I do enjoy numbers. And if you look at just 2020, so kind of the start of the pandemic, our average ransomware payment was right around $100,000. Think of that as an average, and look at what happened as you kind of get into like the fourth quarter or the first quarter of 2021. And you're looking more around like 233,000, which is a pretty dramatic uptick. So when I look at what the total ransomware costs for 2020 actually were aggregated, it's like $20 billion. So you can start to see this is big business for attackers. And when you look at 62% of organizations that experienced a ransomware attack in 2019, this is the thing, and I talked to our CISO internally about this a lot. He's like, why would you ever pay the ransom? Well, we had 57% of those 62% actually pay the ransom. And when you look at the data that's being encrypted and stolen, sometimes organizations don't have a choice. And that's really not a good choice in our mind. So we're going to talk a little bit how to mitigate that today. And I thought it was interesting when you see like ransomware is affecting a business every 11 seconds and how long organizations are down. I mean, you can just look at what happened with the pipeline not too long ago. Kind of that average downtime is 15 days, like 2 weeks. We've had some healthcare clients that have been down for several weeks. So just because we say average, there's obviously a high and a low when it comes to that. And the industries that we see impacted the most really are technology, healthcare, education. And when you look at it, technology, it's like data has become kind of that digital currency. Healthcare data really is our very livelihood. Like, what is it when it comes to health? You need access to those records to be able to administer medicines and to see what somebody allergic to. So that's why these types of organizations are targeted, because they are so data rich, and it's something that they kind of need in order to do their day-to-day. Some good headlines around ransomware. The Washington Post had something pretty interesting where they were talking about the kind of the critical infrastructure. I look at the pipeline again as a good example. The healthcare IT news about ransomware that's specifically targeting healthcare, even to the point where the FBI now is getting involved and doing studies of their own and looking at unique instances. And it was like 16 in a matter of days. And then for security, this magazine in general, kind of like the debate that my CISO and I were having, the pay or not to pay. I mean, that kind of is the question when you come down to it, no matter how expensive it is. And it's one of those things where we are dealing with criminals at the end of the day. So what kind of trust do you have when you get to that point of actually maybe needing to pay something? So I would say, really from a business leader perspective, what do you need to know? And I'm sure most of the people on this call have a pretty good understanding of what ransomware is, but I always like to level set and make sure we're all on the same, kind of the same page before we get going. So when I say ransomware, really what I'm talking about is it's a type of malware, and it's used by hackers, attackers, whatever you want to call them, to encrypt your data. And once that data is encrypted, you don't have access to it anymore. So it's renaming it, it's encrypting it, you can't open it, you can't rename it back the way that you would think you could. And there's really two types of ransomware that we're seeing. There's some more variants that are starting to become prevalent, but the ones that you see the most are crypto ransomware. So this again is that encrypting of the files, renaming them, doing all that kind of stuff. And then the locker ransomware. So this is basically locking the device so that you can't log in. There's no way to get in as an administrator. The device is in essence useless. The only thing that it can do is communicate out and basically see if you've paid the ransom. And then in theory, it will unlock and you can go back to mostly normal. but as you'll find, there's always a remnant that is left behind. So when you have been impacted, there's a lot more that needs to happen other than just paying a ransom. So I'm a fan of kind of these anatomy of an attack. And, we all look at the kill chain type diagrams, but I like the one for ransomware, where, you're kind of starting from the beginning of where most of these attacks happen. So let's kind of follow this chain. So first and foremost, the attacker sends an email. It's got a malicious link or payload, or you could just think of this as an attachment in general. Our victim, they click the link, maybe they open the attachment, one of the two. Then the malware unpacks, it executes, then that command and control that I was just talking about, that gets established. So that malware starts reaching back to its home base. Then it downloads a public key. So in any encryption, you've got a public key and a private key. And obviously, who has the private key? It's the hacker, it's the attacker. And that's how they would then unlock or unencrypt everything that is now going through step 5, which is file encryption. It begins, it goes quickly. Then the user notification goes out. Somebody's demanding payment of some kind. It's typically a form of cryptocurrency. And then somebody either does something like pay the ransom, or if you've got good backups, which we're going to talk about, then at this point, you're trying to restore and get to a good state. Let's say that doesn't happen. Step 8 is that private key is delivered, and then we're able to start decrypting our data. But remember, we are dealing with criminals, and it's not a guarantee that you're actually going to get that private key. And you could be stuck paying the ransom and then getting nothing for it. That has happened, and it's not great, but we have seen it. So I think Gartner has a good thought when it comes to how organizations can protect themselves from ransomware. And I know some people are like, oh, Gartner, Magic Quadrant. Researchers, I think, have some good value, especially when it comes to something like this. So there's a couple of steps that Gartner would recommend, and I would actually echo these and say they are good, really to reduce that overall exposure to vulnerabilities and ultimately secure your organization. Whether it's starting at step 1, which is conducting a ransomware assessment. And that just means, what does your attack surface even look like? How would you protect it? And do you have the right pieces in place to do that? Being able to do kind of the step 2, which is enforcing ransomware governance. So that's where process and compliance and procedures all meet. Then maintaining that consistent operational readiness. So this is, drills, tabletops, ransomware readiness exercises, really answer questions like, who is even in the room when something like this happens, and then paying the ransom. Do you have to involve law enforcement, local and federal? And the answer often is yes. Then backup, test, repeat ransomware response. So just go through and see, what does all of this actually look like? Implementing the principles of least privilege, doing like just-in-time access controls. And we keep talking about, the fact that identity has become the new perimeter. And it really is true. Being able to protect yourself from lateral movement, which is one of the things that ransomware, I think, does very well, is spread. So I think identity can help slow a lot of that down. If you just don't have access to stuff until you really need it, that's been proven to really help from a ransomware perspective. And then educating and training our users on the proper ransomware response actions. So really it's just training, enhancing, and ultimately being prepared for this kind of an attack. Got another polling question for you. So this one, if you wouldn't mind launching poll question number 2. This question: how ready is your organization to protect itself in the event of a ransomware attack? I've got my suspicions of where we're going to land. Let's give it just a couple of seconds here. I'll take a quick drink. This is great. Lots of engagement, everybody. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we can go ahead and close this poll. So where we came out was not 100% sure. We've got some that say somewhat ready. We have the majority that are saying they're not sure. No one said not ready at all, which is good. I think everybody's got some kind of readiness. I would really question if somebody thought they were completely ready, but that also, I think is in the eye of the beholder, and maybe they're doing tabletops and all of the other things and they just sat through one and it was awesome. But that's typically not what we see. So that's great. So let's go ahead and we'll jump to the next. So, I'd be remiss if I didn't spend some time talking about, how Ensys 360 and Advyz can really help. And I think you're going to enjoy this because you're not going to hear me talk about a product. You're going to hear me talk more about the people, the process, and then the supporting technologies. And they can be a wide variety of things. So I think really when you look at, again, one of our kind of big researchers, Gartner, what are they saying? And ultimately organizations, they need to focus on things like preparation and early mitigation. And I thought this was interesting if you want to cut your losses. And me having been a Boy Scout as a young man, I think this could be summed up as be prepared. That was one of the kind of core principles and something that I think still resonates. And, when I look at kind of that first step that we just talked about, like how do you make sure we get from the not sure or the somewhat ready to that closer to completely ready? It is step 1, the ransomware readiness assessment. So really what we can see typically in an assessment like this are kind of the iceberg analogy. So the top of this, we can pretty easily see, do you have the proper tools? Do you have a defined process? Do you have things like an incident response retainer? And are you doing backups? Are they encrypted backups? And are they offsite backups of backups? But there's some stuff that lies just below the surface. And these are things that we spend a lot of our time really going deeper with. And that's like, secure backups that are offsite. Because if you are getting impacted by ransomware that's attacking your backups, if it's all online and connected, what do you think is going to happen? Do you have an incident response plan? The cyber simulation, the tabletop exercises that we were talking about and enterprise level training, are you doing that? And do you have a plan for that? Have you actually gone through a simulation, an attack simulation? These are things that can definitely help. Having an offline, business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan. We actually had a client, they were ready. They had everything that they needed to really come back from something like this. But what happened is they got hit with ransomware, and all of their backup continuity planning, their disaster recovery, their call list, all of that was encrypted in a drive. They didn't have any of it printed off. They didn't have any of it offline. They didn't have tape backups. So you can see very quickly, they were prepared. They just weren't prepared for what ultimately impacted them the most. And then the insurance, having cyber insurance. And you're starting to see a lot of these cyber insurance providers basically put in these ransomware clauses or riders that says, if you're not prepared and you are impacted, they're either not covering ransomware or it's minimal coverage. And making sure you have some kind of a cryptocurrency on hand. Because if I were to ask a lot of leaders, IT leaders, security leaders, do you even know how to obtain cryptocurrency? The answer is no. And if it's for an organization, it gets a little more complicated because I think your legal is going to be involved. And I'm pretty sure we all know that takes a while. So I think really this is the secret sauce when it comes to our approach to ransomware readiness overall. So we have our Advyz incident response framework, and there's a couple of pieces to that framework. So what we look at is, what are your business objectives? Like, protecting your brand, continuing operation, continuing to grow through something like this. And, when you start looking at kind of what's that next step, it's looking at policies, procedures, management. What are your tools and technology in the environment? Then we'll drop down into the operational model and we'll see, what does that cyber incident response process look like? And in the end, what this gives you is the ability to assess your ransomware readiness, and it's against our full response framework. So you can see the alert and scope, doing the investigation, containment, being able to eradicate something that is bad, like the malware, how you recover, how you report, and then most importantly, like, what are the lessons learned? So I would say one of the best things that comes out of this assessment, and it's pretty special, is you get something that's useful for everybody. And this is one of the things that I was excited about when we just did this for a client. We've done this, quite a bit, but this client was really excited about, they had something for their executives. They had some assessment results that could help them with like that tactical response. And then they had an overall recommendation for their technical teams. And that was really like, how do you implement something or some things to bring your organization closer to that preventable category? So, really in the end, if you were to ask me, is ransomware inevitable or is it preventable? I mean, I think what we've shown today is really preparation increases the likelihood of success against, defending against an attack. I will say it is, it's inevitable. Someone or something is going to try. I think we've established that we're under attack consistently, but it's within our capabilities to prevent that something from actually succeeding. So I would say the benefits to your organization of doing an assessment like this, you're going to better understand the evolving threat landscape. You're going to ensure you have a solid understanding of the maturity of your own response plan, or create one if you don't have one. You're going to enhance your security posture and your overall response readiness. You're going to be able to mitigate that critical data and IP theft risk. You're going to reduce the overall risk of ransomware to the organization. And it's really coordinating communication and response, and making sure everybody knows their tasks, and make sure that you have the right resources involved in the right places. So again, just having that plan put together will get you to the next step, which is really shifting from a reactive stance to a proactive one. So based on all of that, I know we've probably got some questions. So I had a couple come through while I was talking. So let me just make sure I read this. Okay, so how do most organizations start from a tools perspective to mitigate, or I think that says prevent, ransomware? So I think you saw in the beginning when I showed the attack, kind of the, the path that it would follow, that kill chain. And what I'm finding is most of our clients are mitigating from a couple of different ways. They've got some kind of email gateway where they're stopping the phish, they're stopping the file, they're stopping the link. They're following that up with some form of DNS protection. So even if something does get through and they click the link, it goes and does a check and makes sure that, wait a second, this site has only been stood up for like 7 days. So it's going to throw an error and not go there. Good endpoint detection response. And I would say data security and overall data governance are kind of the follow-ups to this. So as you're seeing, it's more of like a layered approach when it comes to protection and prevention. What happens if you don't pay the ransom and your backups are infected? Sadly, I would say you end up starting over from a technology perspective. We actually had a client who was impacted. They did pay the ransom, but they did not get their key, and the organization that basically owned them disappeared. So they ended up having to start completely over, stand up a new Active Directory, new file store. They stood everything up kind of the right way this time. It was all cloud-based and it was pretty ready to go from the beginning. But just imagine kind of what that loss ultimately looks like. Let's see, with so much protection available, why do attacks keep getting through? So I would say generally, the first thing that I do when I'm performing one of these assessments is to go in and get a good hardware and software inventory. And for those that follow NIST, CSF, or CIS-20, that's kind of like the first thing you do. But you can't imagine how many unprotected endpoints that I find where ransomware could, in essence, land. And I was talking earlier about moving laterally through even a protected environment. Just because something is patched, it may not be able to prevent anything because that prevention suite isn't even installed on the endpoint. So just making sure that and this is something that, I've talked to other CISOs where they say, like, Brad, what keeps me up at night is not the fact that we're being attacked. It's more along the lines of, do our endpoints and our applications, are the pieces that we need actually installed to make sure we can prevent or stop these kinds of attacks? So something to leave you with is to just make sure you've got that good hardware and software inventory, and you can verify what is on your network and what it has installed on it. Can it protect? But I think trying to keep things out at the perimeter, let's just call it a perimeter. It's really, I'd say, doesn't exist as much as it used to, but just being able to stop as much of it out there before it hits the end user or the endpoint is still your best bet. So, okay, I think we did a pretty good job. We are 30 minutes in. I think we answered some good questions here. So again, if anybody has any questions or too shy to ask today, my email is pretty easy. It's just brad.bussie@entisis360.com. Hit me up and we can talk about anything more in depth that we went over today. So with that, I say have a great day and we'll see you on another webinar soon.